So we're in our front room here. This is our incubator, and my wife has got some eggs in here. Can you hear the chicks?
See the little beaks.
Almost there. So, and I'm, there's a queue for the incubator because this is where the eggs from our meat chickens are going to go as soon as these guys are done. I don't know what time it is, but it's the evening now. So we'll check on these again first thing in the morning and have a look and see what progress there is. And then, can I put the next lot of eggs in there while those eggs are still in there, love?
No, I should wait until they're all finished.
So, how long do you think for this batch? Another how long before? So in about 2 days, my wife says she'll give up the incubator for me, and then we'll be popping those other eggs in, the ones that I've been saving from the meat chickens. Just woke up and just come to have a quick check on the chicks. So my wife's here. She's the custodian of these chicks, and she's just had to rescue one. The two that were pipping yesterday are outlet, and this guy was really struggling. We'll put the heat back on him. But that guy was really struggling because he was he actually out the egg or not?
No, it was half in and half out.
So
it dried up the...
So he'd chipped enough that the inside, the wet bit, had all gone dry, and he was kind of stuck to half the shell. So my wife had to rescue him, and that's why he's looking a bit damp, because she's had to moisten him up to make sure he can get the rest of the shell off him. That's a nice way to wake up. And at least one of the other eggs that's still intact is making lots of noise. So I'm going to get at least 4 out of this batch, which isn't super successful, but it's fine, you know, whatever you get from whatever we get anyway, we consider just to be a bonus. So I've been home from work about an hour and a half, and we've now just finished all of our hedge trimming. So I'm gonna pick up a load of this and give it to the goats, and then we'll go and check on those chicks again. They didn't get any hay this morning because I knew we were doing a lot of hedge trimming this afternoon, so they're even more excited about it than they are usually, aren't you girls? So I met my wife while I was feeding the goats. So she asked for a hand in with this battery because she's obviously got her hands full collecting the eggs. So one of the electric fence batteries needs recharging. They're all linked up to, thank you love, they're all linked up to solar chargers, which kind of help. They're like trickle chargers, so they will gradually top up the battery, but not quite as fast as they get depleted. So every so often one will need topping up, so we bring it into the house and we just plug it in to our battery charger, and we've got 2 or 3 spare batteries that we keep charged in sort of rotation, so we'll be swapping them over. And now we're going to just have a quick look at the chicks. Oh look, so we've had an extra hatch. And it looks like there's another one pipping as well. What are you pointing at, son?
One there.
Pointing close.
That one's got...
It's got a little chip on it, is it? Excellent. So my wife assures me that as of tomorrow, we can put the next round of eggs in here. Before I stop for dinner and a coffee, we're going to go and collect up, not all, but a lot of the hedging. We're going to do probably the stuff that is a bit untidy on the path and get that to the goats. And then we're going to do one of the jobs that until recently was one that my wife took care of. So we share everything, so we both do everything. There's nothing that is like, that's your job, you know. There are things that my wife does every single day, like collecting the eggs and feeding the hens. That's something my wife does every day, but that's not her job, if you know what I mean. It's not, I wouldn't feel put out if, you know, my wife said, oh, can you take care of this today? So everything is both of our responsibility, 100%. But there are things that my wife just does every single day. And until recently, that list was quite large. So my wife works in a school. She is a teaching assistant. Until recently, we've just had summer holidays. But even before that, with lockdown and what have you, my wife was basically at home full time. So she was not only able, but, you know, quite happy and enjoyed doing quite a lot of the jobs. And now that she's back in school, and this is her second full week of being back in school, there's obviously some of the jobs that previously I didn't really pay much mind to because my wife just took care of it. She's now struggling to keep up with a lot of those things. And as I said before, they're not her jobs, they're just jobs that she took on and was happy to do so while she was at home full time. And one of them is the watering of the vegetables. So as soon as I've fed the goats, we're going to go and water the greenhouse and anything else that needs it. So I'll just show you our watering regime, if you like. We haven't had much rain in the last few days, probably 6 or 7 days, including 2 or 3 quite warm ones. And before that, we had quite a lot of rain. So we had a period when, if anything, I was a little bit concerned with some of our plants being a bit too wet, our globe artichokes, for example. But since then, it's been quite dry. So we're going to be watering pretty much everything that we would normally water. And I'll just talk you through that as I do it. But in the meantime, I'm going to pick up some of this for the goats. Hopefully you can see they've got a big load of hedge in there to get through, a load of beech hedging with quite a few brambles actually mixed in, which are 2 of their favourite things, a little bit of rose as well. Now, one thing I have definitely noticed with goats, not so much with the sheep, but they really prefer to eat up off the ground. I've noticed that if I can feed them, it doesn't matter what it is, if I feed them the cuttings in the hay rack higher up off the ground versus on the ground, they leave less behind. So I do try and do that, but I'm not particularly strict about it, I have to say. And next stop is going to be our watering. Now, we're going to water, as I said, pretty much everything that we would normally water, but a lot of it we don't need to water. We don't water a great deal, the stuff that's outside, because we mulch so heavily. I mean, you can see how much mulch we have down here. These are all annuals now. You can see the corn that was in here, that's all come out. We didn't get a huge yield of corn this year, literally enough for about 3 meals, 3 family meals. And while that's a little bit disappointing, and there certainly wasn't enough for us to save any for out of season, eating the fresh corn is just delicious. It's probably one of my favourite things to eat, full stop, period, because it's so delicious when you have it fresh. It's just a world away from having it from the store. I'm sure I've said several times, but they're one of the plants where as soon as you pick it, the sugars start turning to starches, so it's so much sweeter if you can eat it fresh. So at the moment, I'm just watering some of our tomatoes that we've got in pots down here. And all our tomatoes down here in pots will be just ones that basically my wife couldn't see being thinned. So they're not particularly precious. They are to my wife. To my wife, they're exceptionally precious. Every single thing here that is alive is, but they're not. We're not relying on them for a huge crop. Put it that way. So these get watered every day. So their watering is slightly more consistent, I suppose, than the ones that are in the ground. But tomatoes are one of those plants that are going to enjoy a lot of water. So you definitely, if you're growing them in pots or in grow bags, you're definitely going to want to be watering them every day. And even the ones in the ground, you're not going to want to water them every day, but you are going to want to give them a lot of water when you do. If you're in the northern hemisphere, as obviously I am, then the ship has sailed with regards to having much effect on your tomato plant's root system. But in the spring, when you're watering your tomato plants, it's actually quite important not to water them every day, but instead to water them really deeply every few days, because what that's going to do is it's going to encourage your roots of your tomato plants to develop better, to go deeper, and that's obviously going to protect them from drought. If you just imagine a cross section of your soil with your plant's roots in, if all your roots are shallow and near the surface, then it's not going to take much of a dry spell and those roots aren't going to have access to any wet ground. But if they're much deeper, then they're going to be far more drought tolerant, because the ground that they have access to is going to stay moist a lot longer than the ground right near the surface. So all of our outside tomatoes, we're going to give a really good drenching, because they, you know, we haven't had any rain for a little while, and you know, we make sure that they get a nice lot of water. We've got a few other things in pots here. We've got a couple of hazels. These are just waiting really for me to decide where they're going to go permanently, to give us some hazel plants where we're going to get hazelnuts. We've got a couple of sycamores here, which are just going to go up in the woods somewhere. And of course we have our carrots. We're not going to need to give them too much water because they're pretty much at size now. But again, everything in pots outside or inside hasn't had much water in the last few days from the weather. The only water that it's had has been from us. It's definitely worth getting to know your plants and what plants need what, because things like rosemary, they're not going to want really wet roots. So, you know, even when you do water them, you're not going to want to water them very deeply. Now, here's a plant that is going to want a lot of water, and that's our cucumber plants. As you can see, they're nearly spent. They're starting to look a little bit worse for wear. We had quite a cold night. It wasn't quite a frost, but it was getting close. So I don't think we're due another one for a few weeks. But we had a one-off night where we got almost a frost. And with these guys being so close to the door, I don't know if that's upset them a little bit, but we're going to make sure they've got plenty of water, so that any production that we are going to get out of them, we're not going to stunt by not allowing them enough water. And then the rest of the plants in here are all our tomatoes and chilies, and we're just going to make sure that everything's got enough water. Again, when it comes to cucumbers and tomatoes, you really aren't going to overwater unless you're trying to. You're going to have to work really hard to overwater a cucumber. They're such thirsty plants. So we're going to make sure that everything's had a good drenching in here. I'm actually going to leave the hose in here. We've got another section of cucumbers back here that are all doing much better. They're still highly productive, lots and lots of fruit on them. So I'm going to leave the hose in here just at their base and give them a really good dousing while I go and talk to you about the watering I'm going to do outside. Look, this is strawberry plants that have run through from the other side of the polytunnel. So those are plants that we'll repot and probably sell at our shop. Look, just the other side is our strawberry patch that needs thinning. So strawberries, we haven't watered them at all this year. Our potatoes, we hadn't watered them at all this year, I don't think. We may have watered them once when we had a really dry spell in early summer. In fact, no, we did. Yeah, we watered them once. I watered the entire annual vegetable bed once in the early summer in terms of everything. Other than that, I'm just trying to think now. We've watered our pumpkins maybe 3 times. We watered everything in when it was getting established, and then we've watered our courgettes maybe 3 times. Other than that, because of all the mulch that we use, you're probably sick of me talking about mulch, so I do apologise, but because of all this, that's just the top layer, and then underneath we have last year's, which is breaking down. Half of it's still mulch and half of it has actually broken down into soil. But we've got a good sort of 2 inches now even after, you know, we haven't added to this for nearly a year, and it's still 2 inches thick in mulch. We'll be ready in about a month or two at what most people would consider to be the end of the season, when we rip out most of our plants. So when the courgettes are done, when the squashes and pumpkins are done, when most of the bush beans are done, when those things come out, when the nasturtiums come out, what we'll do is we'll put probably 2 or 3 inches of compost over the whole bed. And although we'll still have some annual vegetables growing in there because we keep them all year round, some of them, we'll just work around those. But we'll be using this pile here and another pile of compost from right in the far corner there, and we'll add a good 2 or 3 inches to this whole bed. So we're keeping that cycle. It does two things. It adds organic matter to the soil, which in the very long term is going to improve humus, which is that soil body, if you like, what helps it to retain moisture and just be really nice looking soil. And then it's also going to be adding those nutrients, all the things that the plants need, and all the micronutrients as well. It's going to be getting them from that composting system that we've got. And then the byproduct of that is just the mulch, which is going to save us on lots and lots of watering, because you know, it's just common sense, really. If you put some soil and spread it out in a tray and leave it out in the sun, it doesn't take long for you to see what happens to that. But if you were to put that soil, put it on a tray, and then put 2 or 3 inches of mulch on top and put it out in the sun, and then come back a little while later and check the soil underneath the mulch, it's pretty obvious what's going to have happened. You know, that soil with the mulch on top is going to have retained the moisture much, much better. So many peppers coming on this plant, but they're just so slow. We've had a handful of peppers this year, but not nearly as many as I would have liked. This plant's actually produced a fair few of a much, much bigger size. So now I've just got to water these tomato plants down through this side. As you can see, we've actually got lots of fruit now, lots and lots of fruit, and it's starting to ripen nicely. We've had enough tomatoes for our family use for the last month or so, which is much later than usual. Usually we'd be having tomatoes from some point in late June, but it's been late August, early September this year before we started harvesting them. But we've had enough for our family to use, and for the last week or two, probably a little bit longer than that, we've actually started developing a bit of a surplus. And as you can see, any minute now, we're going to get a massive surplus. And that's fine, because as of yet, we haven't been able to actually preserve any tomatoes for the autumn, winter or spring. So very soon, we'll be looking at preserving some tomatoes. I know that I've had a request several times on a preserving tomatoes video, and I think I'm going to be able to do that for you guys in the next week or two, maybe a bit longer, but certainly soon, because we're going to have so many tomatoes that I'm going to need to be preserving them, and that will obviously make a video for you. I think I will leave you guys there, and I'll stay here and finish off watering my tomatoes. I've had a look through the annual bed. I don't think I need to water them, so this will be the last of the watering here. There's a few other pots to do here and there, but this will do for this section of the garden. If you find these videos valuable, there's several ways you can support them, the most beneficial of which is to subscribe to our channel. We're releasing new videos pretty much every day, so make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss any of this content. Also, make sure you press that like button. Costs you nothing, takes no time, but makes a big difference to us. So please do remember to like this video and leave a comment down below if there's anything in particular you'd like to see in a future video, or if you just want to reach out and say hi. I will say hi back. Thanks for watching, and I'll speak to you guys soon. Look! So excited!